Let's move on to trading. In his ideal state, Plato retains the class of merchants, albeit in a somewhat transformed form. The fact is that to the trade that existed at the time, he treated negatively. Plato considered any trade, both small and large, a shameful occupation, since the vast majority of traders forgets the main purpose of trade and, instead of extracting moderate profits, prefers insatiable profits. Therefore, he demanded that in an ideal state the law establish the ratio of, between arrival and expenditure for trade operations and, in connection with this, ensure the receipt of, proportional profits. Consequently, the philosopher, recognizing only one function for money, within the country means of circulation, at the same time allowed, though with a certain restriction, the circulation of money as capital according to the formula D, T, D. The question of the source of profit and its quantitative conditioning remained a philosopher unsolved. In the most decisive manner Plato opposed usury. He has not figured out the objective necessity of lending operations, therefore inscribed the ideal state they envisage a law by which, prohibited also pledge anything as collateral loyalty or give money in interest. In the latter case, everyone has the right not to pay any interest or capital. Platonov's talk about laws, translation from Greek B. Obolensky, p. 195. Plato protects a closed subsistence economy based on the exploitation of slave labor and small proprietors. He demands that, in the state there was neither gold nor silver, but also a great profit through crafts and interest and excessive cattle breeding. Revenues should be delivered only by agriculture, which he saw as the only honest source of obtaining funds. As a result, Plato proposes to introduce the regulation of industry and trade. He to some extent anticipates what was done in this respect in the Middle Ages. Industry he proposes to organize in a form somewhat reminiscent of medieval shops, and for trade, to normalize prices, imputing to the duty of lawbreakers to strictly monitor the observance of approved prices. In legal practice, this requirement is to give exercise in rationing prices, which continued into the Rome. It is especially fully reflected in the edict of the Roman Emperor Diocletian, 284–305, which established the maximum prices in the entire state, for non-observance of which the perpetrator was subject to the death penalty. Platon, caring about the preservation of the autarchy, fighting against the accumulation of monetary wealth, was an opponent of foreign trade. He sought to prevent export and import, and for this he considered it necessary to provide a certain level of production, corresponding to the needs of the country. True, he demanded a common, Hellenic coin, as we discussed above, but at the same time he believed that it should serve only to pay military expenses and travel to other states. Observing the aggravation of the class struggle, Plato saw that it threatened the existence of a slave state. In this regard, he preaches communism in his Utopia about the ideal state. Communism of Plato has nothing in common with scientific communism. Platonic communism is a means to perpetuate the domination of the aristocracy. In an ideal state, drawn by Plato, in his book, Politics or the State, the population is divided into three classes. Philosophers belong to the first class. Their functions are to govern the state. They must be distinguished by wisdom. For this they need, according to Plato, to assimilate Plato's philosophy. Their rulers preserve their class state with the help of soldiers, state guards. Warriors make up the second estate. They form the state apparatus of oppression. Warriors must have good knowledge and be courageous. In order for the warriors to better perform their functions, Plato developed for them a whole system of upbringing and education. By the third estate Plato refers to farmers and artisans. All of them can have their own land, houses and money. To this estate, Plato was treated with great contempt. since it forms a mob and its meaning is less important than other classes. Moreover, he argued that if the guards would be transferred to the third estate and the representatives of the third estate into the second estate, then the city-state would inevitably collapse. The appointment of the third estate, in his opinion, consists in ensuring the complete satisfaction of the first two estates, and therefore the state must demand that the people of the third estate are modest and moderate in meeting their personal needs. With contempt, Plato also treated the poor, calling them drones, but at the same time he assured that the poor will not be in the state at all. Plato witnessed especially the intensification of the process of the ruin of the mass of small producers after the Peloponnesian War, which turned into a lumpen proletariat, who was on the side of slaves against slaveholders. Therefore, he sought to prevent in the state of the future a stratification of the poor and the rich inside the third estate and considered it necessary to prohibit the sale of land allotments for this. The size of land allotments was to be determined by law. Plato did not include slaves in the third estate, since he did not consider them citizens, and compared them with pack animals. Along with small producers, slaves in the ideal state of Plato were to provide unlimited satisfaction of the needs of the first two classes. Plato, however, was very concerned about the large slavery of the slaves in conjunction with the poor, so that it was possible for slaves to use whatever they want. He explained that they should not be compatriots among themselves, that is, essentially put forward the principle of divide and rule, which from that time became the slogan of all exploiters. Revolution in 392 BC in Corinth, accompanied by the massacres of the rich, the uprising in Argos in 371 BC, during which 1,500 rich men were beaten, and other acts of the oppressed. Platonov's communism extends only to the first two estates. Plato considered it inadmissible for these classes to have not only private but also personal property. None of them should have any property, none of them should have either a dwelling or a pantry that no one could enter. Hope. Representatives of the first two estates should go to the art canteen, as if to a whole camp, and live together. Under these conditions, according to Plato, there will be no discord in their environment and they will be able to perform their functions in the best way, towering over the exploited estate. Plato, SOCH, 2nd ed., Part 3, p. 195. Ibid. For the same reasons, Plato demanded for the soldiers a community of wives and children, and in order to ensure a clean breed of guards to grant the right of the first estate to strictly regulate the union of men and women. Among these vulgar statements of Plato, who considered it necessary to destroy the family, a thought that deserves attention slips. He demanded for the class of soldiers full equality in the social position of men and women. He stressed that the forces of nature are equally spilled in both living beings, and therefore, by nature, all affairs are involved, and the woman, all in the man. Ibid. p. 258. Thus, communism of Plato, first, is aristocratic, since it covers only the upper classes. Secondly, it is consumer communism, because it does not extend to the means of production, but presupposes for these classes the socialization of only means of consumption at the expense of the exploitation of the third estate and slaves. Plato's communism sought to perpetuate the division of society into exploiters and exploited, to consolidate forever the separation of mental labor from the physical. He said that in the new state to be delivered each state that measure of happiness, which is what produces its nature. Ibid. p. 206. Plato stressed that, whether the matter involves the acquisition of money, or the care of the body, or meetings about something political or private, in all cases, the action is fair. A just man, LM, approves and calls good when it is supported by this attitude of genera, i.e., the existence of three classes. Ibid. p. 240. Marx, describing the ideal state of Plato, wrote, "As in Plato's Republic, division of labor is a fundamental principle of the structure of the state, it is merely the Athenian idealization of the Egyptian caste system." K. Marx, Capital, Volume I, pages 374–375. The bourgeoisie subsequently began to use the vulgar ideas of Plato's communism in the struggle against the scientific communism of Marx and Engels, in order to defend their class interests. The bourgeoisie made a slander against scientific communism, accusing him, in particular, the requirement to destroy the family and to introduce community of women. German fascists, defending the racial theory directed against humanity, in the spirit of Plato's idea of the need to create a pure breed of soldiers, demanded the purity of the Aryan race and engaged in forced sterilization of a part of the population that was objectionable to them. The bourgeoisie in the struggle against the working people widely uses Plato's proposal for inciting ethnic hatred among slaves. Finally, imperialist ideologists are developing at present the theory of natural necessity of war put forward by none other than Plato. K. Marx and F. Engels, Manifesto of the Communist Party, K. Marx and F. Engels, Works, Volume 4, pages 443–444. Indeed, where Platonism does not hide itself. K. Marx, Capital, Volume I, p. 374. Note 80. The economic views of the thinkers of ancient Greece reached their highest development in the works of Aristotle, the greatest ideologist of slave owners, called Marx Alexander the Great of Greek philosophy. Aristotle, 384–322 BC, was born in Thrace. Most of his life he lived in Athens. He grew up in the family of a court physician and very early began to study the natural sciences that had a great influence on the formation of his worldview. Aristotle was a disciple of Plato. Nevertheless, he criticizes his doctrine of ideas, according to which ideas are not a reflection of reality, but some kind of independent supersensible, otherworldly world. Aristotle recognized the reality of the external world. He believed that the idea and the thing are inseparable. Of all the ancient Greek philosophers, Aristotle discovered the most profound dialectical understanding of reality. However, he could not get rid of his teacher's idealistic views and believed in the existence of some kind of abstract, non-material form, idea God, which is the creative beginning of all matter. Thus, Aristotle hesitated between idealism and materialism. In the final analysis, he became a position of idealism. V. Lenin, comparing Aristotle's philosophy with Plato's philosophy, wrote, "Of course, this is idealism, but it is more objective and remote than the idealism of Plato, and therefore in natural philosophy more often, materialism." V. Lenin, Philosophical Notebooks, Gospodizdat, 1947, p. 264. Idealistic are the views of Aristotle and the state, which, in his opinion, is the embodiment of the natural properties of people seeking to cohabitate together. And since Aristotle had in mind the slave state, that is why he considered the slave economy as not a transitory one. K. Marx, Remarks on the Book of Adolf Wagner, K. Marx and F. Engels, SOCH, VXV, p. 457. Aristotle, like Plato, associates slavery with the division of labor as a natural phenomenon. He believes that slaves are those people who by nature can only perform physical work, and free people are people who are incapable of doing this kind of work. Aristotle, Politics, M. 1911, p. 14. Aristotle also expresses other thoughts about slavery. He points out that you can become a slave by law. However, it would be erroneous to conclude that Aristotle is also a supporter of the theory of legal slavery in its pure form. He seeks to reconcile the theory of legal slavery with the theory of natural slavery and emphasizes that in this case the issue also boils down only to the study of slavery in nature. This means that according to the law only the one who was a slave by nature, that is, only capable of physical labor, can become a slave. IBID, p. 16. To the slaves by nature, Aristotle included the tribes of conquerors, but not the Greeks. He insisted that slaves should not be Greeks, but only barbarians, and therefore considered it legitimate to turn the latter into slaves. In another place, Aristotle writes, "If the weavers' shuttles wove themselves, and the collectors played themselves on the cipher, then the architects would not need workers if the house was built, and the gentlemen did not need slaves." Aristotle, Politics, p. 11. And here Aristotle also sought to prove the inviolability of slavery. He did not allow and could not allow such a growth in the productive forces, in which slavery would be unnecessary and impossible. The philosopher was an ardent supporter of subsistence farming, based on the labor of slaves. Aristotle emphasized a contemptuous attitude to physical labor and, like his teacher, Platon, of slaves did not consider citizens. He frankly stated that civil virtue only suits those who are spared from the work necessary for daily living. Aristotle slaves equated to things and pointed out that the slave is part of the wealth of the family. Aristotle approaches economic phenomena ethically. At the same time, oscillating between idealism and materialism, as we said above, the philosopher sought essentially to find out the objective regularity of phenomena. This is clearly manifested in his reasoning about the economy and schematics. See this work, p. 26 et seq. The ideal of an economic man, according to Aristotle, is a generous man, who occupies the middle between wasteful and miserly about the distribution and acquisition of money. Prodigal, it spends too much and too little gets, he writes, and stingy, it spends too little and too little gains. See Aristotle, Ethics, St. Petersburg, 1908, pages 61-66. Consequently, Aristotle considers generosity, extravagance and stinginess as different forms of using wealth, appropriated as a result of the exploitation of slave labor. In the face of a generous Aristotle defended representatives of the class of slaves of medium prosperity. The philosopher believed that the consolidation of the class of slaves of medium prosperity can prevent the disintegration of the slave economy. For this, a fair exchange must be ensured with the help of the state. Aristotle's reasoning about a fair exchange, in spite of the unscientific, ethical character of the formulation of the question, contains a very deep idea for that time, marked by Marx. The philosopher saw in the fair exchange the equality of dissimilar things. The genius of Aristotle, wrote Marx, is revealed precisely in the fact that in the expression of the value of commodities he reveals the relation of equality. K. Marx, Capital, Volume I, p. 66. Aristotle, however, could not find out what this equality is, i.e., the unity of goods, as exchange values. He did not understand what value was, and solved the matter purely empirically. The philosopher saw that all commodities representing various use values are exchanged for money and thus are given the opportunity to treat each other as exchange values. Hence Aristotle came to the erroneous conclusion that goods become commensurable with each other only thanks to money. Money, he writes, as a measure, all objects are commensurable and then equalize them. In reality, it is not money that makes goods commensurate. Goods as values represent reified human labor and, by virtue of this, are commensurable in themselves. Therefore, all of them can measure their values through a single commodity, which thereby turns into money. Thus, Aristotle could not understand that the basis of equality of goods as values is specifically social labor, which is the cost of labor in the physiological sense. For such an understanding, not only a dialectical materialistic approach was needed, but it was also necessary that the commodity form of the product of labor should become dominant. Only under these conditions can we understand that physiologically equal work embodied in things takes on the character of hidden social, abstract labor, which is revealed by equating in the process of the exchange of products of labor as values of the same magnitude. Let us now see how Aristotle understood certain economic categories and their interconnections. Let us first of all note the methodological principle of Aristotle. Considering the phenomena from the point of view of justice, Aristotle just considered everything that meets the interests of the natural, slave-owning economy. The validity of the Greeks and Romans, Engels wrote, are just slavery, as a natural state of society. F. Engels, on the housing issue, K. Marx and F. Engels, selected works in 2 volumes, Volume I, Gospodarstdat, 1955, p. 577. In this connection, Aristotle divides all phenomena of economic life into natural and unnatural. Natural causes Aristotle refers to the economy, and unnatural, to Hreumatists. Kreumatistics, Greek, the art of making money. Economics deals with subsistence farming, considers the phenomena expressing commodity-money relations represented by trading and usurious capital. This differentiated approach to the phenomena of economic life Aristotle pursues primarily in his argument about wealth. The philosopher distinguishes between true, or natural, wealth and unnatural. True wealth consists in the accumulation of means necessary for life and useful for state or family communication. Thus, true wealth is a collection of use values. Aristotle, Politics, p. 22. Under the instruments of natural wealth, Aristotle understands everything that ensures the natural character of the economy. These include nomadic and agricultural life, sea robbery, fishing, hunting, and military art to acquire slaves. To unnatural wealth is everything that is associated with the art of making a fortune with the help of treatment. Thus, Kreumatics deals with monetary wealth, acquired through trade and usury. Aristotle is an opponent of Hreumati, since its goal is not the satisfaction of needs, but the unlimited accumulation of money. Proceeding from the dual understanding of wealth, Aristotle regards the product as a commodity and develops Xenophon's statements on this question. Following Xenophon, he explains that the thing has a dual purpose. Shoes are also used to put it on the leg, and to change it to something else. In essence, Aristotle here, like Xenophon, speaks of 2 properties of the commodity, its use value and exchange value. Aristotle, Politics, p. 23. But Aristotle goes further than Xenophon. He first analyzes the form of value, that is, the expression of the value of one commodity in the use value of any other commodity, depicting this expression in the form of a formula, 1 house 5 beds. The philosopher considers the exchange value as equality and commensurability of things as values. He, however, as we saw, could not determine the basis of this equality due to a misunderstanding of the essence of value, which is embodied, that is, hidden social, abstract labor. Nevertheless, Aristotle noticed the peculiarity of the equivalent form of the commodity. Aristotle, as Marx points out, discovered an understanding that the exchange value of commodities is an embryonic form of commodity prices. The monetary form of value he regards as the result of the development of a simple form of value. Aristotle traces the development of exchange, beginning with a simple exchange, T, and very correctly explains that the exchange relations originally arose between different communities, clan families according to Aristotle, and then began to develop within the latter. Aristotle clarifies the transformation of in exchange, and explains well that the money became the commodity, the most convenient in everyday life. On the basis of this, the philosopher comes to the conclusion that a simple exchange is in principle no different from the exchange of goods for money. He categorically states that there is no difference in whether to take for a house 5 beds or cost 5 beds, that is, a certain amount of money. Thus, in Marx's words, Aristotle understood money incomparably more versatile and deeper than Plato, since, unlike the latter, he perfectly explains how, from the exchange trade between different communities, it becomes necessary to impart the character of money to a particular commodity, that is, substance, which itself has value. K. Marx, to the Critique of Political Economy, p. 112, Note 3. Nevertheless, Aristotle did not understand the historical necessity of this evolution. Since the philosopher lacked even the notion of value, he could not even understand that exchange value was a necessary form of manifestation of value hiding in the commodity. Therefore, Aristotle did not understand the historical necessity of money. He believed that money as a result of the agreement became a universal medium of exchange and therefore in our power to make them uncommon. The great superiority over his predecessors Aristotle found in the question of the functions of money. Considering the monetary form of the commodity as a result of the evolution of a simple form of value, the philosopher, firstly, correctly posed the question of the function of money as a measure of value. Second, he took the first step in analyzing it. Further, Aristotle, stopping his attention to the wealth acquired through trade, first traced how the exchange, turned into the use of money as a means of enrichment, This enabled Aristotle to open a distinction between these two forms of money. C.F. Engels, Anti-Düring, Gospodar's. 1953, p. 216. The philosopher explained that in the first case money refers to the economy, since they play the role of an intermediary in the exchange of use values, that is, they serve as a means of circulation. As such, money is no more than a sign of value, established by law or custom, is a convention. In the second case, in the guise of economics, dramatics are dragged, because money itself sees wealth. Therefore, in the appropriation of money, they see the goal of conversion, which is to increase their number indefinitely. Aristotle, like Plato, the accumulation of money as a treasure essentially considers as a potential money capital and therefore, unlike Xenophon, also refers to this function of money negatively.